On July 24, 2025, a cold and clinical statement emerged from Abidjan. The Ivorian Ministry of Security announced that Alain Traoré, better known as Alino Faso, a fiery Burkinabe activist and outspoken supporter of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's government, had been found lifeless in his jail cell. The official line was short, almost dismissive. He had taken his own life. No photos, no witnesses, no timeline. Just a few words, enough to close the file before the story even began. But news like this doesn't stay buried. Within hours, journalists in Ouagadougou broke the silence, calling it what it was: the mysterious death of a dissident in foreign custody. By midday, hashtags bearing Alain Traoré's name flooded social media across West Africa. Protesters in Burkina Faso shouted a single message: assassinated, not suicide. And suddenly, a tragedy inside one Ivorian jail cell threatened to ignite an entire region's suspicion in the streets. For the Burkinabe public, the timing looks suspicious. Alain Traoré had been arrested only weeks earlier, accused of espionage and conspiracy against the Ivorian state. But to his supporters, his only real crime was being too loud, too vocal in defending Burkina Faso's sovereignty, too defiant against ECOWAS sanctions, and too bold in his praise of Ibrahim Traoré's Pan-African government. Now, his sudden death looked less like suicide and more like a silencing. Crowds took to the streets of Ouagadougou. Placards read, "Justice for Alain," and "Murdered in Abidjan." Meanwhile, in Côte d'Ivoire, the government doubled down. Officials insisted there was no foul play and warned the media against politicizing the tragedy. That defensive posture only fueled more suspicion. And then came the silence. ECOWAS, normally the first to comment on any unrest, said nothing. The African Union offered condolences, but refused to question Abidjan's version of events. For many across the Sahel, that silence felt like complicity. When Alain Traoré's body was finally flown back to Burkina Faso in early August, the scene was unforgettable. His coffin, draped in the national flag, was carried through streets filled with thousands. Their chants were unshakable. He was silenced, not suicidal. To the people, Alain was not a man who gave up. He was a man who had been taken away. Who was Alain Traoré? But why did this death matter so deeply? Who was Alain Traoré, and why did his silence thunder so loudly? Alain was not just an activist. He was a storyteller, a messenger of African pain and possibility. Born in Ouagadougou, he grew up in a society still haunted by the memory of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader assassinated in 1987. That history shaped him as a young student leader. Alain confronted power with words sharper than weapons. He called out the theater of independence, exposing how African nations remained bound by foreign control despite their flags and anthems. His rallies grew bigger. His speeches electrified crowds with a mix of humor, rage, and conviction. To young people abandoned by democracy and globalization, he was a voice that spoke their truth. The turning point came when ECOWAS imposed crippling sanctions on Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger after their military takeovers. While many intellectuals stayed silent, Alain was bold. He declared ECOWAS to be nothing more than a club of presidents, serving Western interests while punishing Africans who dared to resist. His speeches went viral across West Africa. In Mali, Niger, and beyond, Alain became Alino Faso, the people's Faso. A free man with no office and no army, but with words that shook presidents, and that made him dangerous. His praise of Ibrahim Traoré's government placed him on a collision course with Côte d'Ivoire's President Alassane Ouattara, one of ECOWAS's staunchest allies. For leaders aligned with France, Alain's voice was unacceptable. But Alain wasn't just politics. He worked with grassroots groups on literacy campaigns, farming cooperatives, and youth employment. For him, sovereignty wasn't abstract, it was food on the table, schools for children, dignity for the poor. This blend of conviction and authenticity made him a symbol. And symbols are hard to silence. Unless, of course, they are silenced permanently. The official story when Abidjan announced Alain's death as suicide, many refused to believe it. The communiqué claimed he was found hanging in his cell, using prison clothing as a noose. But there were no independent witnesses, no autopsy results, no transparency. Just a statement designed to end questions before they began. But to those who knew him, suicide was unthinkable. Alain thrived under pressure. He lived for resistance. Giving up was not in his character, reports trickled in. Some whispered he had been interrogated in the days before his death. Others claimed guards blocked access to him, even from lawyers. Nothing was confirmed, but everything fit a familiar pattern in West Africa's political history. From Patrice Lumumba in Congo to Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, the region has seen too many dissidents silenced in custody. Alain's case looked like one more chapter in that dark history. And so the narrative hardened. Alain had not killed himself. He had been killed. Traoré's response, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, wasted no time. In a televised address, he called Alain's death a political crime and demanded an international inquiry. State media hailed Alain as a martyr of Pan-African resistance. The funeral in Ouagadougou sealed the verdict in public opinion. To the people, Alain was murdered because he spoke too loudly. Ivory Coast stuck to its line: suicide, nothing more. They promised an investigation, but refused outside observers. They warned Burkina Faso against politicizing a tragedy. But if they had nothing to hide, Burkinabe citizens asked, why resist outside scrutiny? A diplomatic rift, the fallout was swift. Burkina Faso lodged a formal protest. Ivory Coast pushed back. Soon, trucks at the border faced delays and trade slowed between the two neighbors. The economic stakes were high. Burkina Faso depends on Ivorian ports for imports and exports. Côte d'Ivoire relies on Burkinabe labor. Yet political tensions outweighed economics. And beneath it all, the larger divide of West Africa loomed. Burkina Faso now stands firmly with Mali and Niger under the alliance of Sahel states, rejecting ECOWAS and carving a path free from Western dominance. Ivory Coast, meanwhile, is one of ECOWAS's most loyal defenders. Keeping tight ties with France at Alain's death became more than a bilateral dispute. It became a symbol of two rival camps, a fight over the future of West Africa itself. Security risks analysts warn this rift could go beyond politics and economics. Both countries share porous borders plagued by insurgent activity. For years, fragile cooperation allowed for joint patrols and intelligence sharing. If that collapses under political strain, jihadist groups may exploit the gap, expanding their influence across the Sahel. And so, a single death in a jail cell threatens not just diplomacy, but security across an entire region. The making of a martyr. Yet beyond geopolitics lies something deeper: the making of a martyr. When Alain's coffin returned to Ouagadougou, the crowds did not mourn in silence. They roared with chants of defiance. His image now appears on murals, posters, and placards across the Sahel. His name is invoked like a spirit of resistance dying in death. Alain became bigger than he ever was in life. His silence became louder than his speeches. Supporters compare him to Sankara, Lumumba, and Nkrumah. Historically imperfect, perhaps, but emotionally undeniable. To young Africans, Alain is proof that the fight against neo-colonialism is as dangerous today as it was decades ago in Mali. His image appeared in protests against ECOWAS. In Niger, youth movements cite him as inspiration. Across Africa, his story has become currency in the struggle for sovereignty. Legacy and danger, but here lies the danger. His legacy could be co-opted. Political leaders may use his martyrdom as propaganda, without honoring the deeper meaning of his activism. Already, competing narratives are emerging. For some, he is a revolutionary hero. For others, a victim of reckless politics. But even this contest proves the power of his memory. Alain Traoré has entered the realm of icons, where memory itself becomes a battlefield. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré's government, the responsibility is heavy. To betray Alain's ideals, self-reliance, Pan-African solidarity, resistance to foreign dominance, would alienate the very generation that now sees him as a martyr. To honor it, they must turn slogans into real policies, investing in local industries, securing borders, and refusing compromises that undermine sovereignty. The unanswered question, and yet, the question lingers. What really happened inside that cell in Abidjan? Was Alain a man who lost hope, or a man deliberately silenced? Suicide or assassination? Perhaps the truth is buried with him. But in a way it no longer matters. Because Alain's death has already reshaped the region. It has deepened the rift between Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire. It has given new energy to Pan-African movements. It has made a man into a symbol, a voice into an echo louder than ever. If he was silenced to end his influence, then the attempt failed. Alain speaks still, not with words but with the power of his memory. So we end with this question: was Alain Traoré's death truly a suicide? Or was it an assassination hidden in plain sight? And more importantly, what will Africa do with the legacy he left behind?